Hi everyone, so today the first thing we're going to do is go over our homework from last night. So I asked you, what are the solutions of the equation? So we're going to use something called the zero products property rule to solve this. So in the first problem, we have 4x plus 3 times x minus 6 is equal to 0. Now what we're going to do is we're going to set the first set of parentheses equal to 0 and then the second set of parentheses equal to 0. So basically what we're going to have is two separate equations, and we're going to be looking, or we're going to have two separate answers. So in both problems, we're going to be solving for the variable. So we're going to have 4x plus 3 is equal to 0, and x minus 6 is equal to 0. Now we work one problem at a time. So I'm just going to work with this one over here. 4x plus 3 is equal to 0. So our goal is to get x by itself, and the first thing we have to do is subtract 3 from both sides of the equation. So when we do that, when we subtract 3 here and then 3 over here, we get 4x is equal to negative 3. Now we have to get x by itself, so what are we going to do with that 4? We're going to divide each side by 4, and when we do that, we get our answer as x is equal to negative 3 over 4. And that's our answer for the first equation. And then our second equation is x minus 6 is equal to 0. So we're going to solve for x. Since it's minus 6, to get x all by itself, we have to do what? We have to add 6 to both sides. When we go ahead and do that, our final answer is x is equal to 6. So here our two answers are x is equal to negative 3/4 and x is equal to 6. So let's try this one. 7x plus 2 times 5x minus 4 is equal to 0. So set up two separate problems. 7x plus 2 is equal to 0, and 5x minus 4 is equal to 0. Once again, work one problem at a time. So let's come over here and let's work with this 7x plus 2 is equal to 0. So we want to get 7x all by itself. So what do we have to do with this plus 2? To get rid of it on this left-hand side of the equal sign, we got to subtract both sides by 2. When we go ahead and do that, we get 7x is equal to negative 2. Now, what do we have to get by itself? We have to get x. So what are we going to do with that 7? We're going to divide each side by 7. When we go ahead and do that, we get x is equal to negative 2 over 7. So now that we've got what x is equal to, we're done with this problem. Now let's work with this one. 5x minus 4 is equal to 0. So what's the first thing we're going to do? We got to get 5x by itself. What are we going to do with this minus 4? Well, we have to add 4 to both sides of the equation, and we get 5x is equal to 4. Now, how are we going to get x by itself? What do we got to do with this 5? We got to divide each side by 5, and when we do that, we get x is equal to 4 over 5. So our answer here is x is equal to negative 2/7 and x is equal to 4/5. So what are the solutions of the equations? N times n plus 6 is equal to 0. Now I know in this last problem we had a monomial here, and then here we just have what? Just an n. Same thing, you're not going to take this and distribute the n over here to each of these terms, and same thing with these problems. You're not going to go ahead and FOIL them. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this n and set it equal to 0 for our first equation, and then we're going to take this n plus 6 and also set it equal to 0. Now here, we have to just solve like we've been doing for the variable. Well, n is equal to 0, so there's really no work you have to do here. So over here, n is equal to 0. And then in this problem, we have n plus 6 is equal to 0. So we got to get n by itself. And what are we going to do? Since it's plus 6, to get n by itself, we have to subtract 6 from both sides of the equation. When we do that, we get n is equal to negative 6. So our answers are n is equal to 0 and n is equal to -6. And lastly, we have x minus 9 times x minus 8 is equal to 0. Set the first one, x minus 9 is equal to 0, and then do the second, x minus 8 is equal to 0. And now we work one problem at a time. So let's work with x minus 9 is equal to 0. So we got to get x by itself. So since it's minus 9, we got to do the opposite, which is plus 9. So x is equal to 9, right? Because all we had to do was add 9 on this side and add 9 on that side. Then we have x minus 8 is equal to 0. We got to get x by itself. So what do we got to do? We got to add 8 to both sides. So we're left with x is equal to 8. So our final answers are x is equal to 9 and x is equal to 8. So now we're going to do our quiz review on chapter 9. So as a reminder, the simplest quadratic function is f of x is equal to x squared, or y is equal to x squared. This is known as the quadratic parent function. The graph of a quadratic function is a U-shaped curve called a parabola. So whenever you hear the term parabola, you could think of a quadratic function, and whenever you hear quadratic function, think that the graph is going to be a parabola. It's going to look like a U. So here is what our parabola looks like. This is what the normal y equals x squared graph is going to look like. This is the paragraph. Now, all these graphs we've been doing, there's some variation of this. So the first thing we went over was identifying if there's a minimum or a maximum and the vertex of the graph. So, as a reminder, so when we have our minimum is going to be the lowest point on the graph. So think of it as like a cup. It's the bottom of the cup. And then the maximum, think of it as a hill. That's the highest point of the graph. And that's going to look like a little hill or something. That's going to be the maximum. If there's a max, it's going to be the highest point. And if there's a min, there's going to be a lowest point. And then we're also going to identify the vertex. And the vertex is also where the min or the max of the graph is. So here in this problem, I give you guys a graph and I'm going to ask you, is it a minimum or a maximum? And then what is the vertex? So you're going to look at this graph and you're going to ask yourself, is this graph a minimum or a maximum? Here, this is a minimum. Why? Because the graph is down here at the bottom. So it's a minimum. Now, you can also have a minimum if the graph was somewhere like up here. If the graph looked like that, that would also be a minimum because the point is at the bottom. So you're kind of essentially looking for where the point is. And then you want to identify what the vertex is. So as a reminder, the vertex is over here. Now, some of you guys, when we were doing this homework, you guys were you were telling me this and this point as the vertex. Those aren't the vertexes. Those things I just circled in red, that's what's known as the zeros of the graph. So we don't want to know those. So our vertex is this point down right here. And to identify what our vertex is, remember it's always x comma y. So we got to figure out the coordinates of this point. So let's look. What is this x value over here? Let's see. 1, 2, 3. So our x value is 3 and our y value is -1, -2. So our vertex is 3, comma, -2. And then in this graph, do we have a minimum or a maximum? And then tell me what the vertex is. Remember the graph, the top. So we have a max here. Why is it a max? Because the graph, the highest point on the graph is up here. So if the graph opens downward, we have a max. And if the graph opens upward, we have a minimum. So we have a max, and then I want you to tell me what the vertex is. Remember, vertex is right here, not this point and not that point. this point here, where the min or the max is. So we got to identify the vertex. What's the x value? Well, let's look. 1, 2, and then what's our y value? 1, 2, 3, 4. So our vertex falls at 2, 4. And now we're going to go over graph transformations. So I'm going to explain them to you in the order that you would see them if there was a problem. If there's a negative, or sometimes you guys want to call it a subtraction sign, in front of the x squared, it doesn't matter if there's a number in between. So as long as there's a negative in front of the x squared, then there's a reflection. So what I mean by that, if I have y is equal to negative x squared, that means the graph reflected. Now, how about if I have y is equal to negative 2x squared? Still means that the graph reflects. We're going to go over in just a second what that 2 means again. So now we have y is equal to whatever number x squared. Now we have to think, if it's a whole number, so 1, 2, 3, 4, so anything bigger than 1, the graph is going to stretch vertically. Think of it as taking a rubber band and stretching it. Whole numbers stretch. And then if this number in front is anything less than 0, so if it's a fraction, then the graph is going to shrink. Think of it as if you're going to step on an empty can of soda. You're going to crush the can. So basically, you're crushing the graph. So if I have y is equal to 2x squared, then the graph will stretch. If we have y, so then the graph will stretch. So y is equal to 2x squared. What I say? It stretched. It stretched the graph. And then down here, if I have y is equal to 1/2 x squared, then what's the graph doing? Now the graph is shrinking. So let's take what we went over in the last slide. Now if we have y is equal to negative 4/5 x squared. So if we have y is equal to negative 4/5 x squared, what's the graph doing? It's reflecting. So it's reflecting. And then what's it doing with the 4/5? It's shrinking. Okay. So if you have a whole number, it stretches, fraction shrinks, and then we're going to combine what we did on the last slide. So now if we had y is equal to negative 4/5 x squared, because of this minus sign, it reflects, and because of this 4/5, it shrinks. Now, when we have this, y is equal to x squared plus a number, when we have plus a number, the graph is going to move up x amount of units. So if we have y is equal to x squared plus 200, what is this graph doing? It's going up how many units? Up 200. And now, if we have y is equal to x squared minus a number, when you have minus, the graph is going to move down that many units. So if we have over here y is equal to x squared minus 100, it's going to go down 100 units. So now let's take what we've learned, everything so far. So we have y equals negative 3x squared plus 30. So I want you to tell me everything that's going on in this graph. So we have a negative, we have this plus 3, or we have this positive 3, and then we have this plus 30. So just go in order. What does that negative sign in front mean? It means it reflects. So it means it reflects. What does this 3 mean? It means it stretches. And then what does this plus 30 mean? It means it goes up 30. So that's pretty much what the basic graph transformations. Negative means it reflects, and then a number in front of x squared, if it's a whole number, means it stretches. If it's a fraction, it compresses, and then to the right of x squared, you'll have plus or minus a number. If it's plus, it goes up. If it's minus, it goes down. The next thing we went over was creating a table of values. So in one of these problems, I'm going to give you the equation, and then I'm also going to give you a table, and I'm going to give you the x values, and then you're going to have to write in the equation and then tell me what the new coordinates are. So in this table of values, we have y is equal to x squared minus 7. If I tell you 0, wherever there's an x, we're going to plug 0. So we have y is equal to 0 squared minus 7. 0 squared gives me 0. 0 minus 7 is negative 7. This was our y value, so our x value was 0, so our new coordinates are 0, comma, negative 7. Now if I give you 1, you go ahead and plug in 1 for x, so we do 1 squared minus 7. 1 squared is 1, minus 7. 1 minus 7 gives me negative 6, so my answer is 1, comma, negative 6. Now, if I give you 2, we plug 2 in for x. PEMDAS, we do 2 squared first, so 2 squared is 4. 4 minus 7 is negative 3, so our x value is 2, and our y value is what we just found, which is negative 3. Now we have a negative 1. So what do? We plug negative 1 in for x, so y is equal to negative 1 squared minus 7. Any negative number squared will always give you a positive number at the end. So negative 1 squared is 1. 1 minus 7 is negative 6. So our y value is negative 6, and our coordinates are negative 1, comma, negative 6. If I give you negative 2, we go ahead and plug negative 2 in for x. So we got negative 2 squared minus 7. Negative 2 squared is 4. 4 minus 7 gives us negative 3, so our coordinates are negative 2, comma, negative 3. Now the next thing we went over was quadratic equations can have 2, 1, or no real number solutions. What you're going to have to do is at the very last step, you need to take the square root, not at the beginning, at the last step. So what you're going to be doing is getting x squared all by itself, and then the very last step, you take the square root. And remember, it's impossible to take the square root of a negative number. So I want to know, what are the solutions of each equation? So here we have x squared minus 625 is equal to 0. Your first step, or your first goal in mind, is to get x squared by itself. How are we going to get x squared by itself? We have to do something with this minus 625. Well, we're going to add 625 to both sides of the equation. And when we do that, we get x squared is equal to 625. Now what can we do? Now we can take the square root because x squared is all by itself. So when we do that, take the square root of x squared and the square root of 625, we get x is equal to 25 and x is equal to negative 25. When you take the square root of any number, your possible solutions are the positive number and the negative number. The reason you can have a negative number is because if you did negative 25 squared, it'd be negative 25 times negative 25, you'd get the positive 625 back. So there's two ways to get a positive number. Two positives multiplied together and two negatives multiplied together. How about this one? X squared plus 36 is equal to 0. We got to get that x squared by itself, so what are we going to do with that 36? We're going to subtract it from both sides. When we do that, we get x squared is equal to negative 36. Now we're going to take the square root of this number, and we get x squared is equal to the square root of negative 36. Well, it's a negative number. If you put it in your calculator, it's going to come up error or no non-real answer, no solution, some variation of that. So because it doesn't work, can't take the square root of a negative number. Here in this problem, there is no solution. And lastly, we went over the zero product property. This is what we reviewed at the beginning of our lesson. So each set of parentheses, you're going to set it equal to 0 and solve for the given variable. So I want to know what's the solution of the equation. 6x plus 12 times x minus 2 is equal to 0. Set 6x plus 12 equal to 0 and x minus 2 equal to 0. Work with one at a time. So we're going to work over here. We have 6x plus 12 equal to 0. How are we going to get 6x by itself? What do we got to do with this 12? Got to subtract it from both sides. We go ahead and we do that. We get 6x is equal to negative 12. Now we got to get x all by itself. Well, because there's a 6 in front, to get rid of that 6, for the 6 to cancel, we got to divide each side by 6. When we go ahead and do that, we get x is equal to negative 2. Now over here, we have x minus 2 is equal to 0. Gotta get x by itself. Well, since there's a minus 2, to get it by itself, we're going to add 2 to both sides. When we do that, we get x is equal to 2. So our two answers are x is equal to negative 2 and x is equal to positive 2. How about this one? N times n minus 19 is equal to 0. Set n equal to 0 and then set n minus 19 equal to 0. Well, over here, there's really no work to do, so n is equal to 0. And then over here, we have n minus 19 equal to 0. We got to get n by itself, so what do we got to do with this minus 19? Got to add 19 to both sides. When we do that, we get n is equal to 19. As always, here is our pet of the day. This right here, this is Mr. Sabak's dog. This is Jake. And some daily reminders. Tomorrow you'll have your quiz on everything we've just gone over, and any missing or incomplete work is due to me by Wednesday, June 17th, because that's our last day of classes. As always, if you guys have any questions, please be sure to send me an email. Good luck on your quiz tomorrow, guys. Have a good day.